across this country, people are waking up and saying what we are doing is not working. People are hurting tragically, and we need to turn this country around. There is a better way, a brighter future. How do we win? How do we inspire young people? Number one, we tell the truth. Defend the Constitution. All of it. Defend the First Amendment, the right to free speech, the right to a free press, the right to freedom of religion, and that means, among other things, not having the IRS ask citizens, tell me the content of your prayers. We need to stand for the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. We need to stand for the Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, the privacy of every American. Every child deserves an opportunity to have an excellent education regardless of your race, your class, your creed, where you come from. Every child deserves a fair chance at the American dream. We need to audit the Federal Reserve. We need to abolish the IRS. We need to stop bankrupting our country. We can either choose to keep our head down, to not rock the boat, to not stand for anything, or we can stand for principle. Millions of Americans stood up last fall and said, stop this train wreck, this disaster that is Obamacare, that is hurting millions of people. The Democrats said, the mainstream media said, they said this is hopeless. Don't you understand? Just move on, just accept it. You can't do anything to stop this. Yes, we can. Thank you. What a blessing to be with you today. You know, the Word tells us when two or more are gathered in His name, He will be there. And there are more than two of us here today. What an incredible blessing to join each of you here at Liberty. You know, I think of the folks that have come to speak to you. You've had Donald Trump. You've had Willie Robertson. You've had Justin Bieber's mom. And now each of you came out and you discovered you got stuck with a lawyer. And even worse, a politician. You know, I'm reminded of one time I was on an airplane, was sitting near the back, and over the loudspeaker came a page. And they paged Tom Cruise. And somewhat sheepishly, I came to the front of the plane and I said, I think possibly you might be looking for me. You have never seen so many disappointed flight attendants. So y'all are a little bit in that same boat. But I will say, you know, there are few things to keep you more grounded than being a parent. Heidi and I are blessed. We've got two little girls, Caroline and Catherine. Caroline is 5, Catherine's 3. Remember back a couple of years ago during the Senate campaign when Caroline was just 3 years old. It was one Saturday morning, about 6:30 in the morning, and I was on the telephone in our bedroom doing a radio interview. And Caroline had jumped out of bed, as she always does, and she ran into the bedroom to play with Mommy and Daddy. She threw open the door to run in, and Heidi, who was still in bed, jumped out of bed, went and grabbed Caroline, picked her up, took her to the living room, and said, "Not now, not now. Daddy is on a radio interview." And Caroline, at age 3, she crossed her arms, she stomped out, and she said, "Politics, politics, politics. It's always politics." Well, let me say, we are here today to talk about something a lot more important than politics. I'm here today more than anything to encourage you. To encourage you in your faith, to encourage you in freedom, to encourage you in standing up for the principles that define you. I want to start by sharing a very simple principle, which is that faith and freedom are intertwined. You know, I was moved by that last song, Pilgrim. It was incredible listening to the analogies drawn in that song between our journeys as Christians and the journey of America. They fled kings with oppressive hand. That's how that song started. And if you think of our nation, if you think of the pilgrims that came here, they were fleeing religious oppression and they were coming to the New World. And they fought a bloody revolution, but the more important revolution wasn't fought with guns and bayonets. The more important revolution was a revolution of ideas. Number one, they said, for millennia, we had been told that our rights are given by kings and queens and monarchs as a matter of grace. The framers of this country started with a radically different proposition, a proposition reflected in the Declaration. We hold these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed, not by a king, not by a queen, not even by a president, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That proposition was radical, that our rights come from God Almighty, not from a king or queen or ruler on this earth. And secondly, for millennia, people had been told sovereignty resides at the top. What the framers did is they inverted the concept of sovereignty. They said, no, sovereignty begins with we, the people. And they lend some limited authority to government for a short time to carry out the essential duties. But the Constitution serves, as Jefferson put it, as chains to bind the mischief of government. Those were radical propositions. Those were propositions that enabled this to be a land where each and every one of us can seek out God Almighty with all of our heart, soul, and mind, free of the government getting in the way. Now, each of y'all are here at Liberty because you came to be trained as a champion for Christ, to stand for your principles, for your faith, for your values, and you understand the transformational power God's love can have. I'm a graduate of Second Baptist High School in Houston, Texas. So I've had the wonderful experience of Christian education in my upbringing. Have seen firsthand. My wife Heidi is the daughter and granddaughter of Christian missionaries. As a little girl, she lived in Africa, in Kenya and Nigeria 2 different times, sharing God's love. Her brother, an orthopedic surgeon, was a missionary in Haiti. He was helping run one of the few hospitals that was standing after that tragic earthquake. You know, Scott tells a story of a nurse who was helping deal with all of the human tragedy after that earthquake. And the nurse, her son was trapped in a building that had collapsed. He was alive, but the building was collapsed, and she would go and visit him and talk to him through the rubble and pass in water. And about a day into it, the rescue crews came with a crane, and so she went there to see her son be rescued. And they wrapped the strap around the concrete beam and began lifting the beam. And it slipped and fell. And she watched as her son was crushed and killed. And this Haitian nurse, she went back to the hospital. And she put on her scrubs and went back to work. And Scott asked, he said, how can you be back here? You just saw your son lose his life in front of your eyes. And with a tear in her eye, she said, how could I not be back here? These people are hurting and they need me. That's what Christian love is about. That's the transformational power of what each of you are doing. But I want to say, secondly, just as the song Pilgrim described, these are troubled times, and religious liberty, the very first liberty in the Bill of Rights, the very first protection we have, has never been more imperiled than it is right now. You know, I've been blessed over the course of my career to have the opportunity to stand and defend religious liberty many, many times. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas, I was honored to defend the Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol grounds. It's been there since 1961. until an individual plaintiff, an atheist, a homeless man, filed a lawsuit seeking to tear down that monument. And I was honored to defend that monument. We went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, we defended the Ten Commandments on the very last day of the last decision coming down from the court. By a vote of 5-4, the Supreme Court upheld the Ten Commandments monument. Now, I'll tell you a story from the argument as we're sitting at the argument, getting ready for the argument to begin. It's about 9:58, right before the justices ascend the bench. The U.S. Solicitor General, Paul Clement, who was supporting the state of Texas, he leaned over to me and to the Attorney General, Greg Abbott, and he whispered in a loud voice, "We've figured out a way that we're going to win this case." So obviously the Attorney General and I were pretty interested to hear what this was, since we had 2 minutes till the argument started. And Paul said in a whisper, "We're going to argue that the Ten Commandments are international law." And it worked. I was also honored to defend the Pledge of Allegiance. The words, "one nation under God," you'll remember in California when another atheist filed a lawsuit seeking to strike down the Pledge of Allegiance. And the federal court ordered the Pledge of Allegiance struck down. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of all 50 states defending the words, "one nation under God." And we won unanimously. In private practice, I was blessed to represent over 3 million veterans, defending the constitutionality of the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, a lone white Latin cross erected over 70 years ago to honor the men and women who gave their lives in World War I. The ACLU had filed a lawsuit seeking to tear down that monument. The federal district court ordered the monument taken down. The Court of Appeals ordered the monument taken down. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And what the federal courts had said is that you could not gaze on the image of a cross on federal land. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of over 3 million veterans defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, and we won 5-4. You look at the battles that are going on now. We've seen the IRS demanding of citizen groups, tell us what books you're reading. Tell us the content of your prayers. Let me tell you something. The federal government has no business asking any American the content of our prayers. Although I wish they had responded, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." You know, we've seen in Alaska an Air Force chaplain who posted a blog post, said there are no atheists in Foxholes. And he was ordered by his superior officers to take that down. I guess because it was deemed insensitive to atheists. You know, I kind of thought that was the job of a chaplain, to be insensitive to atheists, to welcome them into the forgiving arms of a loving God. It's very interesting, that phrase, "there are no atheists in Foxholes," comes from a 1954 speech that President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave to the American Legion. And I would note, President Eisenhower had some passing familiarity with the military. In that speech, President Eisenhower described a story of what's known as the 4 immortal chaplains. In World War II, the USS Dorchester was traveling around Greenland when it was hit by 3 torpedoes from a German U-boat, and the Dorchester began to sink. On that ship were 4 chaplains, 2 who were Protestant, 1 who was Catholic, 1 who was Jewish. And they discovered to their horror there were not enough life vests for the men aboard the ship. And each of those 4 chaplains took the life vest from around their necks and they handed it to another man aboard that ship. And then the 4 of them stood arm in arm, singing hymns as they went down with the ship. And the origin of that phrase is that when each of them handed the life vest over, they didn't ask the man in front of them, "Are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Jew?" They simply stepped forward and sacrificed their life to save the life of their brother. That is the history and shared legacy we have. That is the importance of religious liberty. Just last week, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in the Hobby Lobby case, a critical case that goes to the heart of religious freedom. This case is all about, if you listen to the media, they'll tell you this case is about whether people can access contraceptives. It has nothing to do with whether people can access contraceptives. There's no dispute in this country. Anyone who wants to use contraceptives is able to do so. What the Hobby Lobby case is about is whether the federal government can force people to violate their religious beliefs and pay for the contraceptives of others. You want to understand what Hobby Lobby is about? There's another case that illustrates it even more strikingly. It's a case about the Little Sisters of the Poor. Little Sisters of the Poor are a Catholic convent of nuns who've taken a vow of poverty. They spend their time caring for the poor, caring for the elderly, providing health care. And right now, the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters of the Poor, trying to impose millions of dollars of fines because these Catholic nuns are unwilling to pay for contraceptive services for others that violate their religious faith. For a nation that was founded by pilgrims fleeing religious oppression, how through the looking glass have we gone that the federal government is now litigating against our citizens, trying to force us to violate our faith? Religious liberty's never been more under assault. But the third thing I want to say to you is we are called to action. As believers, we are called to actions, not to sitting quietly and hiding our faith under a bushel, but to stand and speak no matter what the consequence. I'm reminded of one of the greatest leaders in the history of our nation, Dr. Martin Luther King, a pastor who spoke out against the grotesque injustice of racial discrimination in this country. And if you go and look at Dr. King's historic remarks in front of the Lincoln Memorial, his "I Have a Dream" speech, where he said, when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And indeed, if you look at the famous 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail, the opening words of that letter were "my fellow clergymen." The letter from a Birmingham jail was a letter to pastors, calling them to stand for their faith and stand for justice. In that letter, Dr. King said, "I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their 'Thus saith the Lord' far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left the village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid." We are called to action, and action when it's not easy. That was written from a jail cell. How many of us have been imprisoned for Christ? Y'all had the opportunity to hear from Abedini. And I know you're familiar with the tragic and yet inspiring story of Pastor Saeed Abedini, an American pastor from Idaho who is right now incarcerated in the nation of Iran for standing up and speaking his faith, for professing his Christian faith. He was incarcerated in the notorious Evin prison and then transferred, even worse, to the Rajai Sher, their death row. And I can tell you, in the midst of being imprisoned in an Iranian prison, none of us have ever experienced that. Pastor Saeed wrote back to his wife and said, even in prison, I have been able to lead some 30 fellow prisoners and guards to Christ. We should all be praying for Pastor Saeed and for his wife and his 2 little kids, and we should be calling on our government to stand up and speak out and say, free an American pastor unjustly imprisoned in Iran. But we are called to action. The Word says we should be watchmen on the wall. We should be salt and light. Light cannot be seen if it is hidden. If it is hidden behind a pulpit, if it is hidden in a dorm room, if it is hidden in your living room, light cannot be seen unless it is in the world. If you value religious freedom, and I know every man and woman here values religious freedom, then we have a call to action. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, the Jewish holiday of Purim was celebrated. You know, Purim talks about when Haman prepared to kill the Jews, and Queen Esther, herself secretly a Jew, stood up and spoke and acted. She spoke on behalf of the people of Israel, and when she did so, she took her life into her own hands. The most likely outcome based on the ways of the world is that by speaking out, she would be executed. That was not a small step. That was a leap of faith. And yet Esther acted and saved the people of Israel. Well, let me tell you, each and every one of us are here. We are called to action just like Esther was. I have to tell you, I'm inspired. I'm inspired to be here with you. I am inspired to be with believers who are standing up with courage, who are standing up for the principles you believe in. Heck, I am so inspired, I may get an eagle tattooed on my chest. But you inspire me because, let me tell you something, the 10,000 people that are gathered here today and the thousands more that are online watching, you have the ability to change the state of Virginia. You have the ability to change the United States of America. The 10,000 people here, you have the ability to change the world. I want to encourage each and every one of you to go and speak out. You know, one of the great things about technology, none of you have to wait till you've graduated from school, till you're working. Every one of you can speak out right now. You have the ability, you have the passion, you have the voice, and the great thing is, with social media, you've got tools that you can reach out. If you come up with a message that captures the principles you believe, that captures the principles this country was founded on, that defends the free market principles, the constitutional liberties that have been the foundation of the nation, then you can put that message out. You can put it out on YouTube. You can put it out on Facebook. You can put it out on Twitter. Or as some of my colleagues in the Senate call it, that Tweety thing. You can speak out. And every one of you has the ability to connect with your friends, with your family, with your neighbors in a way that resonates 1,000 times more than some politician from Washington ever can. You have an ability to be a voice, and I'm inspired by your commitment to do so. If you believe in religious liberty, if you believe in standing for your faith, if you believe in the liberties that are protected in our Constitution, then I would encourage and call you to act. And let me tell you, all across this country, people are waking up and standing up. I am encouraged by the movement that is sweeping this nation. I want to close with a story that my father tells many times from the pulpit. Now, I will say, you also kindly welcomed my dad here just a few months ago. It touched his heart to have the opportunity to come and fellowship with you. The story he tells, the story of a tightrope walker who erects a tightrope over a gigantic waterfall, and a crowd gathers round. And the tightrope walker says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back?" Everyone cheers, and he does. He says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back pushing a wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he does. He says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back pushing a wheelbarrow with two 100-pound bags of sand in the wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he does. He says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back with a man in the wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he points at a man in the front row and says, "Get in the wheelbarrow." Now, the point of that story is that believing, whether it comes to salvation or comes to standing for your faith and standing for your principles, isn't sitting back and doing a polite little golf clap. Believing is getting in the wheelbarrow. Believing is putting everything you have, everything you are, standing up with everything you can be, and getting in the wheelbarrow. America was founded by men and women who got in the wheelbarrow, who risked everything for freedom. Liberty University is founded and run by men and women who got in the wheelbarrow, who risked everything for their faith and freedom. And each of you are here in your own lives, getting in the wheelbarrow. And that is what gives me so much hope for the future of our nation. Thank you, and God bless you.